The last set of problems you guys are asked to look at is to practice solving quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are equations where the highest power on the x is a 2, meaning that you have an x squared term floating around and nothing higher of a higher power than that. So there are two main steps that you need to remember when it comes to solving quadratic equations. Step 1 is to isolate the x squared. Once you have the x squared by itself on one side of the equation, you'll take the square root of both sides. But you have to remember that when you take the square root of both sides, you need to use a plus minus. Okay, let's look at an example of what that looks like to kind of clarify a little bit. What if I have the equation x squared minus 12 is equal to 4? The first thing I need to do is isolate the x squared on one side of the equation. Well, to get the x squared by itself, I need to get rid of minus 12. So let's add 12 to both sides. Minus 12 and plus 12 cancel out, and I get x squared is equal to 16. Now my goal is to get the x by itself. So I want to think about undoing. Well, how do you undo square? You undo squaring with square roots. So I'll take the square root of both sides, and the square root will undo the square. And I end up with x is equal to, now you might be tempted to write 4, but it's actually plus or minus 4. The reason for that is, if you have x squared is equal to 16, you're trying to say, well, what numbers, what can I plug in for x so that when I square it, I get 16? It's definitely true that 4 squared is equal to 16. But isn't it also true that negative 4 squared is equal to 16? So there are actually two solutions to the equation x squared equals 16. So over in the original problem, hopefully that clarifies a little bit why I need to put a plus minus. Moral of the story, if you take the square root of both sides of an equation, there are two solutions. You have to put a plus minus in front. All right. Let's look at another example. How about 8x squared minus 4 is equal to 44? All right, so your first thing you want to do is isolate the x squared. So to get this x squared by itself, if this was 8x minus 4, the first thing I would do would be add 4. So let's add 4. So now, minus 4 and plus 4 cancel out, and I get 8x squared is equal to 48. Now I need to get the x squared by itself before I can take the square root of both sides. So I'll divide both sides by 8, and now I have x squared is equal to 6. If I want to get the x by itself, I need to undo the square. So I'll take the square root of both sides. The square root undoes the square, and I get x is equal to, now remember your plus or minus, the square root of 6, that's really, well, 6 isn't a perfect square, so this doesn't come out to a nice whole number like it did with the 4 above. And also, the square root of 6 can't be broken down, so I leave it as x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. And I'm done. Okay, last one. Now if you feel like you're getting the hang of this, I want you to try this one on your own. So pause it and then see how you did. Alright, so let's look at 2x squared minus 1 is equal to 23. Now's your chance to pause and try it on your own. Alright, my first step is I want to get the x squared by itself. So I need to first begin by getting rid of this minus 1. To undo minus 1, I add 1 to both sides. Minus 1 and plus 1 go away. I get 2x squared is equal to 24. Before I go crazy with square roots, I need to divide both sides by 2 to get the x squared completely by itself on one side of the equation. So now I have x squared is equal to 12. To undo the squaring, I use square roots, and I have x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 12. Now, the square root of 12 is something that can be simplified. The square root of 12 can be broken up into 4 and 3, and 4 can be factored into 2 and 2. So one of my 2's will come out, the other one will go away, and this 3 will have to stay under the square root. Sorry, I lost my video a bit, but you guys were hopefully seeing what I was doing. All right, or thinking about what I was doing. So, last thing I need to do then is rewrite the square root of 12 as 2 square root of 3. But remember, your plus minus needs to go along for the ride. So it's plus or minus. I'm not redoing the video. The lights just turned out. Plus or minus 2 times the square root of 3. All right. I'm not going to waste time redoing all that. Guys, I hope that you have a wonderful break. If you have any troubles,